Hey Magic fans, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, and guess what day it is today? It is Monday, Masters Monday, where we are going to learn from specialists, their archetype, get to learn some very in-depth knowledge about how their deck works in their format. If you love to learn from masters and get those insights to their decks, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Today's special guest is a master of Legacy Goblins. He's been playing the format for years and has published results with Goblins for years. I'd like to thank very much to our special guest, Eli, also known as GoblinLacky1.
Glad to be here. Glad to talk some goblins.
For those who are meeting you for the first time, what are your accomplishments with Goblins, and why would you say you're an authority to this archetype?
So, I don't have that many paper results because I don't get to play paper very often.
A lot of us have the same problem.
Yeah. In college, I top eighted. I split the finals, top four day a GPT with Legacy Goblins. I went undefeated at a 1K. Mm-hmm. At the end of December, which I was pretty proud of. And the biggest event I've gone to was the SG Con. They had a Duel for Duels event, and the first one I went to, I did pretty well, and that was when Deathrite was legal. I got 34th, so I missed out top 32 on tie breaks, which kind of sucked. But I was pretty proud that I made it to the end of day 2, still live for prizes with Goblins when Deathrite Shaman was still legal. And I beat some really good players. I beat Tan and Grace on Grixis Delver, which I was really proud of because he's a master of that deck. And
right.
There's a picture on his Twitter that I'm in of him with Young Pyromancer in play, and he says I just got Goblin Chain Whirlered. I'm playing Legacy today.
Oh.
It's when Chain Whirler was insane in Standard. Mm-hmm. So those are my main paper accomplishments. I don't get to play very often. I've got I think a 15K I'm practicing for in May, so hopefully I'll do well at that. And then online, I've 5-0'd a bunch of times. I maintain a spreadsheet of my leagues. I was just checking last night, and since that 1K, since the end of December, I'm just shy of 70% win rate on Moto. I'm 69.4 or something.
It's an absolute fantastic win rate.
So I've got a lot of practice with the deck. I'd like to play in the premier events more, in the challenges, but I haven't really gotten a chance. I don't really get to play on Sunday that often, so the Sunday challenges are a little tough to play. I've done okay. I played 2 of the playoffs when they were. That's how the system was. They changed it recently. There's a showcase this weekend that I got to get up enough points to play in, so I'm hoping to do that. But I cashed one of the playoffs and then scrubbed out another one. So nothing much there. But I'm really when I think about my accomplishments, I don't really think of my results so much as I've inspired a lot of people to believe in the deck again, and I also think I've made some critical innovations in the deck to keep the deck moving during Grixis Control. When we were talking about Grixis Control, was really, really popular. I'm proud of the fact that I was the one who found the tech to make that matchup good, and figured out how to construct the deck to make it good, because that matchup was really, really bad for normal goblins.
What were the key pieces to getting an advantage?
I adopted Volrath's Stronghold as a main deck card to beat Grixis Control, and it was also good against lots of other decks.
What is it called?
Volrath's Stronghold.
Oh, Volrath's.
Yeah. So it's a land. It taps for colorless, and then it's pay 1 and a black, tap it, return target creature card from your graveyard to on top of your deck. Mm-hmm. So Grixis Control around 2018 was playing 3 to 4 Hymn to Taurox, 3 Kolaghan's Commands, Liliana the Last Hope, 3 to 4 Snapcaster Mages. They had all the removal spells in the world, tons of ways to shatter Vial, and would annihilate your hand with hymns. Stronghold was amazing in the matchup because it just nullified all the discard spells, because you could never get your card advantage onto the board fast enough was the problem. So they would just like him your matrons and ringleaders, Thoughtseize them, whatever, and so you'd never actually get to deploy. And so you'd lose the long game. What Stronghold allowed you to do was have pure inevitability, because what would eventually happen as the game would drag out, because they didn't have many win conditions, they had like 2 Gurmag Anglers as the only way to actually kill you. What would happen is you just end up with a situation where you had a Volrath Stronghold with a bunch of lands, and you just start casting, put a Goblin Matron, Goblin Ringleader on top of your deck and cast it every single turn, and you just run them out of resources, and eventually you'd find Siege Gang Commander. And that deck cannot beat infinite Siege Gang Commanders. This is not doable. So that was the tech back then. I haven't played it. It wasn't good during the Ren and 6 because Wasteland was everywhere. Because obviously it's not very good against Wasteland decks. And I'm kind of interested in playing it again recently, but I haven't found the slots because I'm playing 4 Wastelands, 4 Ports, and it's hard to play another colorless land. So I've been trying to fit one at the sideboard. It's a little difficult. But I use that in combination with Cabal Therapy as well to insulate against him. And I got really good with Cabal Therapies, like just like blind naming, the exact card that I was scared of. It's like, oh, opponent probably has Liliana last up in hand. Snipe it, blind Cabal Therapy. And I love Cabal Therapy. It's one of my favorite cards. So I was really proud of it. I read
your mind.
Yeah. It's such a sweet card when you hit with it. So I think
the real Thoughtseize.
Innovating on the deck to find its niche during different metas is what I've been kind of known for. And I started my channel because there was a running joke that Goblins would always lose on camera. Whenever there was a Legacy event and Goblins show up, it was like, oh, it's the Goblins coverage curse. But I was frustrated because I'd be like, if the Goblins player played a little different, they could have won this game. Mm-hmm. And so I still believed in the deck, and I was just thinking that people were playing it badly. So I basically wanted to prove people wrong who were saying that Goblins is like an irrelevant old archetype by trying to reinvent it a bit and show that if you can play it well, it can reward you still.
You see, this is the Goblin version of me. It's basically what it is. I mean, I had the same feeling. I'm staring at all these Merfolk players on camera. I'm like, oh my god, they're just walking into everything. Yeah. I need to get on camera and show them how it's done.
Yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
What would you say are other innovations that you've made to this archetype to direct everyone in the right direction? Like, what would you say are the biggest deck construction errors in Goblins today?
I think people play way too. They play the biggest tendency is to play not enough lands and play too much top end. Because with a deck like Goblins, it's really, really tempting to think about magical Christmas land scenarios, and so people really love to imagine what happens when their GoblinLackey connects. Right. And so you'll see lists that are really, really top heavy, and so you'll see multiple 5-drops like Kiki Jiki or Siege Gang or both with Kranko. They'll just have tons of finishers.
You can't do this in Legacy.
You got to pick a very small number of finishers, I think. You got to keep the deck as lean as possible. So that's a big one. I think people play, I've seen lots of lists with 22, 23 lands, and I think 24 is really important to hit because if you look at the curve, it's quite high. Yeah. And the most comparable deck to Goblins and Legacy is Death and Taxes. And Death and Taxes also plays 24 lands a lot nowadays. We do have ways to cheat on mana that D&T doesn't, but our curve's also a lot higher. They have 1 4-drop. We have 7. Right. So you gotta play enough lands. The biggest thing Goblins loses to more than anything else is getting mana screwed. Goblins is the opposite. It's the opposite of most other decks in that it's way happier to be flooded than screwed, because we can, with the right top deck, you can utilize almost infinite mana because you can just go Matron for Ringleader, that's 7 mana, and then cast whatever you hit off of the Ringleader, which could be another Matron for another Ringleader. You can just keep going. So like I kept a hand last night. I got super punished for it in the most ridiculous way, but I kept 4 lands, 3 vials, because I knew that if I draw a matron or a ringleader at any point during this game, I'm almost guaranteed to win, because my ringleader will be very good because my deck is just all goblins at that point. What ended up happening is I drew 2 spells and they had turn 1 Pithing Needle either vial.
Just 3
game
for
1.
you.
Yeah, it was fine. I won the match. It was fine. So that kind of thing can happen, but you can keep really mana-heavy hands with goblins because you can utilize flooded mana very easily, and wastes and ports also mitigate flood to some extent.
Okay.
Those are the biggest things for what I say. And also, I mean, there's some goblins players that are super like retro because they're basically just playing the deck out of nostalgia, and so they'll play like these really old school lists, like 4 war chiefs, 4 pile drivers. And I think those cards are weaker than they used to be. They're still good in certain circumstances, but there's only so many slots we can devote to like cards that don't interact with the opponent whatsoever and don't generate any card advantage. So like you kind of have your like beatdown slots or like combo. Honestly, they're more like combo cards. War Chief, Pile Driver add a combo element to an otherwise pretty fair deck, where you kill people out of nowhere. And I tend to de-emphasize the combo aspect of the deck, at least in that sense. Sling Gang is like also kind of a combo card, because Tendrils of Agony on a goblin.
Yeah.
But it asks different things of you, because Sling Gang's just happy when you just like cast a million Muggle War Marshals. And so the balance right now in Goblins is like balancing that combo element of War Chief, Pile Driver. Also the fact that they're X2s and don't die to Plague Engineer is really relevant. With the kind of more control combo of like just control the board with all of your, crappy creatures that just make attacking impossible, like Muggle War Marshal, Matron, just build up a pile of 1/1s and then throw them all at your opponent all at once. So that's what the deck wants to be doing, I think, ideally. But the meta with Plague Engineer won't allow you to fully lean into that plan. So you need to be able to pivot.
So this is a very interesting archetype that we're going to talk about, because I know from my perspective as a Merfolk player, people like laugh at me when I decide to play Merfolk in Legacy, because Legacy is an incredibly hostile environment. So what is it about Goblins that you would say makes this deck competitive in such a hostile format?
So there's a couple things. So Goblins, if I can refer back to history a little bit, Legacy history, because that's what Legacy's about, right? Goblins won the very first Legacy Grand Prix.
Wow. Okay.
In Philadelphia, 2005. It was John San. I know this because recently I played his deck list from 2005 in the league. It was really fun. We went 1-4, but it doesn't matter. Zero combo hate, and we played against
bringing back the glory days.
Yeah, glory days. So the deck has existed basically since the existence of Legacy, in some capacity, and it has ranged from being unplayable to the best deck in the format. And I think what gives Goblins an edge in today's Legacy is it has some of the best. It's still to this day the Matron Ringleader card draw engine is still very effective, especially against a lot of the fair decks of the format, and the fact that Goblins has gained additional interactive tools. Like a lot of Goblins players like to refer to the deck as a sort of control deck, because you can outdraw most other decks in the format, including the like hard blue control decks. Those are your best matchups. What we've been lacking has been additional interactive tools, and that we only had we have no really good Shatter Goblins. We didn't have our Gem Palm Incinerator was our main removal spell, and that is, while very powerful as 2 mana, destroy a creature, draw a card, uncounterable. That's extremely good, but it could be a little slow because you need to generate a board state first to kill something. With the printings of the last 2 years, we've added a lot to our ability to interact. And so we have a lot better game in terms of killing opponent's stuff quickly, then pulling ahead with our card advantage. And so assembling that game plan made us, I think, a much more viable deck than it used to be since I started playing the deck in I guess like end of 2015 going into 2016. I started playing the deck, like having it for real.
So like that, I hear. So what you're telling me is that this deck has pretty damn good blue matchups, and Legacy, for a decent chunk, is like pretty blue based because of Force of Will and Brainstorm.
About 50% of the format is blue.
So that therefore is one of the largest draws to playing goblins in Legacy. Well, what would you say are the key pieces to like really putting this deck over the top in those blue matchups? What are the key players?
I think, well, it's tough to talk about blue in a vacuum because you have like the two really distinct. There's kind of three because there's the blue combo decks, which you don't really want to be seeing, like Sneak and Show, Storm. Then there's the blue control decks, which is what you really want to see, which archetypically is Miracles, which is basically blue-white, now splash green, splash red for Oko, Veil of Summer, and red for Red Elemental Blast to win the mirror. Those are really good matchups because you have a lot of virtual card advantage and actual card advantage in your deck because they have so many cards in your deck that you just do not care about. Like Forcible's like okay if it's hitting turn 1 Vial, but past that, you're a 4 Cavern deck, 4 Lackeys, lots of redundant effects. So like a Force of Will 2 for 1, like if they force pitching their Statcaster, they're so down on cards. There's they have like Spell Pierces, sometimes they have Counterbalance that goblins just can fully ignore.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's that, and then there's the fact that you have this incredible card draw engine that can outpace anything that they've got going on. So that's like the strategy for the blue control decks, and then there's the blue tempo decks, which is your Delver stuff. Delver, I'd say we're slightly favored against most Delver variants. It's close. There's a lot of play to the matchup. Daze can be really good against you if you get your Cavern Wastelanded and they daze your 3-drop or whatever. Or if you just
hate Daze. It's the most frustrating card.
And
we've got Ether Vials and Cavern of Souls, and somehow still lose to Daze. It's the most infuriating feeling in Legacy.
But so it's all about can you resolve your first couple pieces, and then you can use your Gem Homes and Munitions Experts to just kill everything. And we do have cards that we used to have to untap with like a Goblin Sharpshooter to wipe a board. Now you can just play Chain Whirler and just like clear everything.
Yeah, true story.
The new cards help out there a lot. So I'd say like slightly favored against most of the blue tempo decks, very favored against most of the blue control decks, and then unfavored against the blue combo decks.
Do you just have no interaction against those blue combo decks?
Besides, you can steal some games off of Wasteland and Port. Like I've definitely won. I've won a decent number of game ones against Sneak and Show, just with turn 1 Lackey, like Cavern Lackey, and then kill them by like turn 4, and then you can Wasteland and Port them every turn. Like that, that's a reasonable thing. And if they do just have Emrakul, Crater Maker can take out Emrakul. So they do need to have Omniscience Emrakul or Grizzlebrand.
Let's remind people what Crater Maker is.
Yeah, so Crater Maker is 1 in a red for a 2/2, and it's pay 1 generic to either deal 2 damage to target creature or destroy a colorless non-land permanent. And really helpfully, this includes 99% of artifacts, but also Eldrazi.
And does it include Merit Lage? I can't remember.
No, Merit Lage is black and it's indestructible.
Oh damn! Okay, forget it.
Yeah. So that is a tough matchup for the most part. Dark Depths. But Cratermaker handling Emrakul, Jite, Batterskull, Thought-Knot Seer, and like Delver Secrets makes it an incredibly versatile card in the format. It kills like almost everything you care about. Like Eldrazi is one of our most insanely lopsided matchups. Like the other like really good. Sorry, I might be skipping ahead a little bit.
But it's all good. It's all good.
Our other like really really good matchups are the most of the Chalice decks. Goblins cares very little about Chalice unless it's turn 1 on the play and we have an Aether Vial hand. You can use Cavern to get your other 1-drop goblins through Chalice. And with a combination of lots of blockers, Cratermaker to destroy all the, like every Eldrazi that's not Ulamog, and then all of our other removal spells, and like Mogwai Marshal to chump block if we want to, Goblin Trashmaster to just annihilate the board. Eldrazi is one of the most...
Trashmaster?
Oh, he's so good. He's Shatterstorm on a body. And oh lord.
Red, 2 generic. It's a lord. Other goblins you control get +1/+1, but you can sacrifice... Oh, yeah. Sacrifice a goblin, destroy target artifact.
It is really good against Death and Taxes. And Mono Red Stompy, like they're trying to hide behind Ensnaring Bridge, just like, sack my Mogwai Marshal, destroy your Ensnaring Bridge, attack for 6,
Right.
It is really, really good. And so there are Chalice matchups are all insanely lopsided. Like I have over a 90% win rate against both Eldrazi and Mono Red Stompy because, Blood Moon, haha,
and Merfolk.
Who cares? Yeah, and Merfolk's Chalice deck too. But that's kind of for different reasons. That's more of a pile driver related reason.
Yeah. Well, the curve is like so low, and there's a lot of cards in the Goblin list that are just terrifying to stare at.
Well, I think Merfolk's thing is just they don't have enough removal, and Goblins when stuff isn't being removed is insanely powerful.
Yeah.
Like Lackey, kill your blocker, hit, kill your blocker, hit, kill your blocker, hit is really good. War Chief, if it sticks around for like 2 turns and I have any amount of gas in my hand, is insanely explosive. Pile Driver, if you're not answering with removal, you can't block it in your deck outside of Mutavault, which I have Wastelands saved for. It's really well set up. And then if we're playing stuff like Krenko Mob Boss, I used to play fairly consistently. It's gotten worse since I've just wanted to play 2 Sling Gangs as finishers now. But Krenko is also really good as Merfolk, because if you can't kill it, I'll make a zillion 1/1s.
Krenko Mob Boss. Why not? Why not Krenko?
Yeah, so you could go like War Chief, activate in the same turn.
So you would say your good matchups are basically the Chalice decks, because you can
ignore most of what they have going on and then go over the top of them is the way I'd put it. And also Wastelands and Ports tend to be really good against Chalice decks. Tell
me a little bit about Rishadan Port in a deck like this, because at least Merfolk has had like quite a few results over the last 4 years, and I felt like Goblins, which has a very similar looking shell, I thought like there's something strange about their list compared to like Merfolk's, and one clear difference was Rishadan Port. And I know from the Merfolk perspective, this card is really clunky for us. Like we are already usually falling behind. Our curve is not very low. And when I look at your deck list, it's not exactly a low curve deck either. You got not. 3 drops, you got 4 drops. So how do you
7 4-drops? We have 7 4-drops in the deck. It's not a low curve deck at all.
Yeah. So how do you justify Rishadan Port in a deck like this? How does it operate?
So Port, Goblins uses Port very differently than, say, Death and Taxes for the most part. Death and Taxes is trying to use Port to lock people out with combination of like Thalia, Revoker, Mother of Runes to like just not allow the opponent to do anything. Port in Goblins is a delaying tactic. It is trying to slow the game down so as to allow Goblins the time to hit its own land drops, or get the vial ticked up to the appropriate number, or push an early advantage if you do have a lackey start that goes unanswered. So like turn 1 lackey, they don't have an answer for it, port you after that means you're probably not going to get to answer it for another turn.
Right.
So Goblins has very kind of different styles of draws, I would say. Like
Right.
it has some very beatdown draws and then has some very controlling draws. And port is very good with both of them. So port's great with your aggro draws because it means your opponent's not going to be able to catch up when you've come out ahead. And it's really good with your controlling draws where you need to slow the game down and protect your hand or stop your opponent from killing you. A lot of fair decks in Legacy are really 3-drop heavy right now. And so that's why I really like Rashad and Port, because if I can stop you from hitting your 3-drop until I've gotten my vial to 3, that's a huge deal. Because that lets me more easily like matron for an answer the turn your threat comes down or something. So Port I think is widely misunderstood, and it's hard to use because deciding, like, am I going to play my 2-drop or am I going to port you? Like that decision is really difficult and contextual based on your hand and what the matchup is. But it's really important for stealing game 1 against combo decks, and it really helps out against a lot of like lands-based strategies. So you can like port their Maze of Ith or
Okay.
Keep them off their colored sources, because in Legacy mana bases are stretched really thin. And like with Miracles now, they're playing 4 colors, so they're like, but there's still tons of basics to play Astrolabe. If you can like shatter their Astrolabes or they don't find them, then Port can keep them off of like white indefinitely, and they can never cast Entreat the Angels no matter what they do. Like just a game I played last night on stream was I was playing against Blue White Red Breach, one of the best decks in the format, and this is going a little deep, but I used Earwig Squad, which I imagine most people don't know what it does.
What is this? What squad?
Earwig Squad.
Earwig Squad.
So
well, we're about to learn now. It's got Prowl.
Yeah, it's got Prowl. So it's a 3 and 2 black for a 5/3 that you can Prowl for 2 and a black. So Prowl for if a Goblin or Rogue, I think, hits the opponent, then you can cast it for its Prowl cost. So most of the time it costs 3. And its ability is, if you pay its Prowl cost, you can look at your opponent's deck and exile 3 cards. So it's one of our few anti-combo cards. So against traditional like Ad Nauseam Tendril Storm, you can just take the Tendrils and man any copies of Empty the Warrens, and they just could not win the game anymore. So it was a great way to steal game 1 against Ant, where you can get this into play and Prowl it on turn 3. You can get it to play on turn 2, technically, if you have a Lackey into War Chief or Lackey into Prospector. But stealing game 1 against Ant is huge. So that was kind of why it was adopted. But it's also quite good against Miracles. You can take their Entreat the Angels. Now they have like 2 Jaces to win the game with anymore, and that's just not going to happen. Yeah. But against Breach last night, I looked through the deck, and they didn't have their combo pieces in hand yet. But I noticed that if I could take all their basics, they had no fetchable lands left in their deck. So they had a Volcanic Island and a Snow-Covered Island, and those are the only lands they had left in their deck. And I had 2 Rashad Imports. And so I could just fully lock them out of casting any spells for the rest of the game, unless they found 2 Lotus Petals to cast Breach. So
Goblin Prison.
Goblin Prison. Goblins is, I affectionately call Goblins like the control combo aggro prison deck, because it can do so many things. So Port is really multifaceted in its uses, and so it's either tempo, control, prison. Like it does a lot of different things based on what you're trying to accomplish.
It's very interesting. Now you're making me think like maybe I can play Master of Waves in Legacy. It's a 4-mana merfolk, but it seemed unplayable because it was just so expensive.
Well, you gotta remember, Goblins wants, its curve is quite high, but it does have lots of ways to cheat on mana, whereas Merfolk only has Vial.
Oh, that's right. You have at least Goblin Lackey.
I have Lackey to cheat stuff in play, and War Chief to give stuff discounts, and I have Script Prospector to get ramp stuff out early. So like I had a line last night against Pox where I was getting locked out by Ensnaring Bridge, but I had 2 War Chiefs in play, and I top deck Matron, and I go Matron for Sling Gang Lieutenant, drain you out for 9. and I had 6 mana, and so each of my matrons cost 1 mana. So, and Slingang cost 2. So, or 1. Yeah.
Well,
2.
how does Rishadan Port interact with Wasteland? Or maybe it won't matter because you still take them off a turn and then they have to Wasteland the Rishadan Port, and then that just eats up their turn anyway.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you like
the best start I think goblins can have is like turn 1 Vial. They have their turn 1 whatever it is, like turn 1 cantrip, which is extremely common in Legacy. And then you port their turn 2, and then they are forced to Wasteland your port then, and then you port them again. Like you have a second port. Like the follow-up port just cripples them so much because by the time they're getting to 1 colored mana in their main phase after turn 1, all of a sudden your Vial's on 2 already. And you may have been hitting them with Goblin Lackey. You may, have removal spells set up with Crater Maker. You might have a Pile Driver. You're going to start to kill them. Like, the Vial into port is extremely potent. It's like the best start the deck has.
Right. Well, and then without Ether Vial, it's just basically you're just using it as a colorless land. How would you run Rishadan Port when you don't have your Ether Vial draw?
It's much worse. It's going to depend on, like, a lot of times port gets used if I have a turn 1 Vial but it's countered, or Lackey and it gets bolted or whatever. Goblins has more 2-drops than it used to. Goblins used to be extremely 2-drop light, and so port was kind of used to fill the slot of a 2-drop because all your powerful cards were on 3 and 4, so you just needed to get to turn 3. But now we have Crater Maker, War Marshal, Pile Driver, Munitions Expert as like reasonable cards to play on turn 2 a lot of the time. But it really depends on the matchup. Like against like Miracles, I will definitely port them over playing a 2-drop most of the time.
Okay. Okay.
So it depends on like how much you care about committing to the board, or like thinking about my opponent. Like if I'm playing against a black deck like Pox or some deck with like Hymn to Torok, I'll probably port them rather than play something on turn 2 because I want to keep them off of black. And there's this part of port that it gets, I think, under-recognized, in that port gives you information on your opponent's hand.
Tell us about it.
So you can tell what your opponent is kind of trying to cast based on what colors they'll fetch out in response to port. So even if they're continuing to hit land drops, you can glean bits of like what is in their hand, based on porting them. And if you port them and they miss the land drop, then now you know that, and that informs your play in terms of like, okay, so now I just want to keep porting for as long as they keep missing land drops, as long as I can like cast one thing and keep porting. So like turn 4, I'll very likely to go like Mog War Marshal, port you rather than play my Ringleader. So you're trying to get that like slow squeeze to force them to deploy their cards in a more inefficient manner, like upkeep Brainstorms, or you maybe use a removal spell that they didn't want to use right then.
Right.
Force them to tap out in their upkeep, something like that.
Are there good matchups for Rishadan Port and bad matchups for Rishadan Port?
There are very few bad matchups for Rishadan Port. I think there are more bad matchups for Wasteland than there are Rishadan Port. I think you're more likely to side out one Wasteland against really basic heavy decks. Whereas I don't think I would ever side out any copies of Port. Because it's just so versatile. It's not like against even Delver, where it can be slow. You would rather have Port than Wasteland a lot of the time, because Wastelanding Delver is often a trap. I've lost lots of games against Delver because I Wastelanded them, because they can operate off so little mana that Wastelanding them, setting yourself back a land drop, and then they Wasteland you. Now you're down 2 lands, and then you just might not be able to cast spells. So I used to have like a mantra where I was just like, all right, never Wasteland Delver unless you're 2 lands ahead.
Right.
So Port sets them back without costing you a land drop.
No, I totally feel you. When I was running Wasteland with Merfolk, I hated it. For the most part, I did, right? Like Wasteland was in the sideboard, and I would just bring it in when I needed to. But yeah, because the land drop is just so valuable to our creature decks.
Right.
That's very interesting. All right, so that's very good, insightful knowledge on Rished and Important. I'm very enlightened on how effective it is. Especially, I totally can see it for the the control matchups.
It's
Uh,
really good against the control decks. Yeah, that's where it shines.
like
Combo and control.
they're like pulling out their like basic planes. Then you like shut one off, and then now they're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, or they get too many like answer colors, like their planes and green to cast Ice Fang Waddle or whatever. And then sometimes you can just keep them off blue, and then they just can't cast their Ponder, and then they just have a bunch of cantrips locked in hand, which is really good.
Well, you sort of name some overrated cards in the Goblin deck. What would you say is the most underrated card in the Goblin deck?
Mog Fanatic.
Mog Fanatic.
Back in January of last year, I wrote an article called "An Ode to Mog Fanatic."
We don't even have damage on the stack. How can this be good in today?
So he's gotten worse because of the printing of Plague Engineer. But other than Plague Engineer, there are actually very few creatures in Legacy that are two toughness, basically, rather than one. Legacy is very X1 heavy.
Yeah, Delver, Young Pyromancer.
Yeah, Mother of Runes, Dark Confidant.
Basically everything in Death and Taxes.
Yeah, Flicker Wisp, Thalia, and all these things. So Mog Fanatic added basically the argument was like, why would you play Mog Fanatic over Tarfire seems strictly better, right? Tarfire.
Okay.
It's the Goblin tribal shock. But I was basically making the argument that Mog Fanatic adds a really critical dimension of the deck in that it gives you it's a much better removal spell in the context of the shell, because the most important resource in Goblins is bodies on board, because so many of your cards care about it. And the fact that it comes into play off of Vial and Cavern, so it's almost always uncounterable, is also really relevant, and it's more mana efficient. Because the example I used was, if your opponent plays turn 1 Vial, so like playing against Death and Taxes, and so their Vial's on 1. Imagine their Vial's on 1, and you have a Mog Fanatic or you have a Tarfire. The Mog Fanatic allows you to continue to deploy your hand and progress a board state without having to hold up mana. So they may or may not have a Mother of Runes there. The Mog Fanatic lets you not care either which way. If you have a Tarfire, you have to decide to hold up the mana, and if they don't have it, you've wasted your mana. So there's all sorts of situations like that, or it can make mana denial easier to use if you go like turn 1 Vial, turn 2 Port you, Vial and Fanatic kill your 1-drop. It's way more efficient. And it's also critical against Delver nowadays, especially because you want to be able to kill Dreadhorde Arcanist on time. And Mog Fanatic into Munitions Expert, and then sack the Mog Fanatic is the only way you're going to ever deal 3 damage on turn 2.
Okay. Gotcha.
So there's all these little things, and there's all sorts of cool like shenanigans you can get up to with Mog Fanatic. Exiling Bridge from Below, really good against Dredge and Hogan.
Yeah, that's true.
Being a sacrifice source for free has its own value against Batterskull, Jite, Grizzlebrand, dodging lifelink. With block sack shenanigans. Very good against, as I mentioned, Delver. They can't, like, they go. I've had Delver players have to force of will a Mog Fanatic because there's like I have to counter this kill on my Delver. And if you can just go Cavern Fanatic, kill your Delver, like that might be their only threat, and they have to start digging for more. Against gets under Chalice like a Tarfire wouldn't. It just the deck is really short on early interaction, and so adding that little bit of reach and little bit of 1 mana removal adds an important dimension to the deck. The other like underrated card I'd say is Mog War Marshal, because it just looks like a really crappy card to everyone, but it's not.
Mog War
Marshal, it's 2 words. It's from Time Spiral.
There we go. Echo. Oh, this guy. Okay.
yeah. So every time a non-Goblins player sees Mog War, I thought Goblins would stop playing this card like 5 years ago. Like it looks like a relic of a bygone era.
Yeah, it does.
But so the key about Mogwai Marshal is that, yeah, it provides those bodies on board at the cheapest rate possible. So it gives you 3 1/1s for 2 mana, or kind of, depending on how you use the front half. But it has all these synergies with the deck that don't get acknowledged, and that it, first of all, is your best way to power up your jump on incinerators and munitions experts.
Okay.
2, it is your best card with Script Prospector, in that it'll either be 2 mana that can be turned into 3, so a Piratic Ritual. And if you have War Chief in play, it becomes Dark Ritual, because it becomes 1 red, make 3 red, so a red Dark Ritual. And so it enables some of your Storm-esque lines,
right?
Which is really important against decks you have to kill quickly. Against Death and Taxes, it turns your Trash Master into a Shatterstorm, where you just shatter. Just 2 mana for 3 shatters is insane.
Goblin Trash Master.
Yeah, we looked at him earlier. He's the lord that sacrifices Goblin Destruction effect. And then with Sling Gang Lieutenant, he's a Lightning Helix. Sack 3 goblins, gain 3 life, deal 3 damage. So, and he just provides a lot of. He's just an extremely good utility creature. Like, he's referred to commonly as the glue that holds goblins together. You generally want to see like 1 War Marshal in most of your hands, because he's your best 2-drop to play on turn 2. He's really good against just like miracles, because they just I get a warm, happy, fuzzy feeling inside me anytime a miracles player has to spend like a Swords to Plowshares on a Mogwai Marshal token, because they just have to, because it's gonna kill them eventually. So they have to like terminus the Mogwai Marshal. It's such good value. So Mogwai Marshal, super good.
So you're talking about earlier how you're watching people on camera, they're misplaying with this deck. What are the most significant? I mean, and there's a lot of decision making I can see with this deck. It has tons of different lines. I mean, Goblin Lackey can turn into many different lines. So there's a lot of angles that this deck can take. It doesn't play itself whatsoever. What would you say are the most misplayed cards in Goblins?
Kind of as we covered before, Port is really hard to use. As far as the creatures, I think people show their hand a little bit too early as a general rule, and by that I mean, Goblins has a lot of sources of haste, and leaning into that by actually delaying your haste creatures can be really, really good, because your opponent can't anticipate it as well. So I tend to actually sandbag my haste cards in a lot of circumstances, especially against like miracles, where you're trying to attack them for a couple points every turn. I think of it as like, if I'm doing 3 to 4 damage against miracles every turn, I'm happy. I don't need to commit any more to the board than that. And so what you're trying to do is preserve your haste sources so that you're not overextending, because what miracles wants to do is sweeper, planeswalker.
Yep.
And so if you can, hold that Goblin War Chief for a very long time, or hold that pile driver for a very long time. I've had games where I've had a pile driver in my hand from the opening game, or from the opening of the game, and not cast it until like turn 8, but it killed my opponent that turn. And so sandbagging your like sources of burst damage is something a lot of Goblins players, I don't think they do enough, and it can really steal games for you. So I think that's like the most common. I think people just play it too straight up. Like they don't try to get. They don't value hiding the information of like how you're gonna play. I matron for matron a lot because it adds to the board, but also keeps my options open. So like if I have a Lackey that's connecting, I can put in a matron, and if I have a vial that's ticking up as well, then I'm probably going to matron for matron, because when the vial's getting up to 3, then I still have a matron in hand to do whatever I want with.
Yeah.
So keeping your options open and not committing to a plan too early can be really good against decks where you don't know if you're going to want to get Ringleader, or if you're going to want to get something that's like more value, like a Gem Palm or Chain Whirler, or you want to kill them very quickly and you want to get Sling Gang or Pile Driver or War Chief.
So it's very important to know that this deck is not necessarily just an all-out aggro deck.
Not even close.
Is what I'm gathering from you. You got to be a little bit more careful and patient with your resources, because especially in Legacy, you got to be able to beat miracles. That's very important. Yeah. And the way they beat you is you just empty your hand and they'll just terminus you and then you're dead.
Yeah.
And this deck has a lot more grind to it than that.
It has more grind than almost any other deck. There are some. It's kind of, grind is a weird thing to talk about in Legacy, because most decks in Legacy, when they are ahead, are trying to lock the opponent out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the other grindy decks are, Miracles is trying to Fate Seal you out and just deplete your entire hand so you can't do anything. The other like mid-rangey control decks, a lot of them play Knight of the Reliquary, which is just going to wasteland you a bunch of times so you can't play anymore, and then hit you with a 10/10. Lands is trying to do that too. They're trying to wasteland port you a zillion times, or ghost quarter you out of all your lands in your deck. So a lot of the fair decks are trying to create a lockout scenario. So grind is like a weird thing to talk about in that way, because it's never just like, it's very rarely like just a straight up brawl of like both decks hitting each other. It's like when one person gives ground, it's harder to come back. Goblins is very good at winning from behind, which is kind of why I like it. I like that feeling of being behind and winning as a comeback. But the play patterns of Legacy are very kind of snowbally, and so it's like if one player is grinding, it means the other player isn't getting to deploy their own tools to grind, if that makes sense. So it's a strange thing. So being able to bounce back is a really strong element of Goblins that's kind of unique to the deck in a way, because a lot of other decks struggle to come back from behind.
So we spoke a bit about like the advantages of Goblins. What about the disadvantages of Goblins? What are the weaknesses of Goblins in Legacy, and how does that translate to bad matchups?
So obviously, as a deck without access to a lot of anti-spell tools, spell-based combo has no force of will. Spell-based combo has always been kind of the rough spot for Goblins. I've found varying success. Like my total, like I have a big spreadsheet that I keep track of my matches on. My win rate against Storm across my whole time of playing Moto has always been around 50%, so it's not that bad.
No, that's great. I would take Storm, that if that was my bad matchup. I'd take 50% any day. So I have 50% against good matchups.
I think Storm is like not that bad. There are other decks that are far worse. So the really scary stuff are usually the Grizzlebrand decks. Grizzlebrand's just really, really good against what Goblins is trying to do, and we have no way to stop it outside of our sideboard cards. So game one against Blackguard Reanimator, you're probably like less than 10% to win. Because they're just really good. So ever since the London Mulligan, really, they're just so good at producing a turn one Grizzlebrand, even on like a Mulligan to 4. And you just have simply no way to beat that. Like some Goblins players will want to play Sting Scourger to bounce big creatures like that. I think Sting Scourger is like just a trash card that doesn't do the job the vast majority of the time. And so it's just like once Grizzlebrand's in play, you're dead. Like vast majority of the time, because they're going to draw 7 cards, they're going to draw 14 cards, they're going to unmask you, your entire hand's going to be empty, and then they're going to make an Elish. So Reanimator is pretty tough. Stinking is really tough. You have to heavily gear your sideboard. I think if there are.
I want to take a second to look at Sting Scourger. Well, this card looks ridiculous to me. Why does red get a bounce spell?
Planar Chaos.
Like blue doesn't have this. I'd kill for this card. I'd absolutely kill for this card in blue. Give it to me, Wizards. Print the damn thing.
You do not want Sting Scourger. It's bad. Trust me. It's so bad. Echo was 4. You're paying 6 mana.
I don't
for
care.
a 2/2.
We're gonna put in. We're gonna put into play with.
You have Harbinger of the Tides, don't you?
Yeah, but it's not guaranteed. It's very situational. The thing has to be tapped.
That's true.
The opponent's creature has to be tapped. Okay, whatever. Okay, moving on. Yeah. I didn't know this card existed. Red gets a bounce creature spell attached to a 2-mana creature. Ridiculous.
It's very bad.
I'll take your word for it.
So So like if it had flash, it'd be great, but that's the problem though, because like people are like, oh, it'll beat Merit Lage. No, they make Merit Lage
Yeah.
the vast majority of the time, and so you need a vial exactly on 2, and for them to not have crop rotation for Sajiri stuff. So it's just like asking for so many things.
None of this stuff works.
A lot of things need to go right for Sting Scripture to line up properly. So the Merit Lage matchups tend to be specifically depths, like lands. The archetype with like loam and stuff is I think a decent matchup. It's fine, but dedicated depths is a really tough one because they're very good at getting through Wasteland. They're built to beat Wasteland. The
Merit Lage is the thing.
Merit Lage is the thing, and these decks also play Plague Engineer, which is just like an extra kick in the teeth. It's like, this deck is going to make a 2020 on turn 2. Also, it might just play a Plague Engineer on turn 2 with Mox Diamond. And, you know, they're like Vampire Hexmage is a very annoying blocker. Like, it just stonewalls Pile Driver because it's a 2/1 first strike. So the depths is tough. Grizzlebrand decks are tough. Breach, I think, is tough. I've been working a lot to fix the Breach matchup. Like, my current sideboard has 11 sideboard cards for Breach. I can bring in 3 red elemental blasts to counter their cantrips, intuition, and sometimes they have like Chain of Vapor or something for hate pieces that I can counter. Because they have so much shatter and disenchant type effects with Serenity and Wear Tear, I've been starting to lean heavier on Mindbreak Trap. So I've cut Leyline out of the Void from my sideboard because I was finding it just not effective enough because they were so prepared for it. So I've gone down to a mix of Graveyard Hate. So I'm like, I got 4 different pieces of Graveyard Hate, one of each because they all have different applications. So I've got like 1 Relic of Progenitus for like the fair graveyard decks. So thinking Knight of the Reliquary decks is like my best example, or Tarmogoyf decks like Rug Delver.
Yep.
Then I've got a Soul Guide Lantern, which is halfway in Relic of Progenitus and a Tormod's Crypt, in that it's faster than Relic, but more value than Crypt. So it's right there in between. I've got a Grafdigger's Cage, which is the best artifact Graveyard Hate against Breach, because they can't go off through it. They do have to answer it, whereas they can beat a Tormod's Crypt type effect within the same turn. And then I have 1 Surgical Extraction that helps out in some other matchups where the other Grave Hate doesn't really do anything. So like against Dark Depths, it's not a great strategy, but if you can waste on a Dark Depth and Surgical it, then they lose. So like that's kind of you have to cheese them out sometimes. You have to get lucky. So I've got those 4 pieces of Graveyard Hate, 3 Red Elemental Blasts, 2 Mindbreak Traps, and then 2 Chalice of the Voids. Chalice of the Voids is really a great card to have access to. Goblins is nice in that it doesn't have to be a Chalice deck game. So, like a lot of Chalice decks give up points because they have very lopsided matchups, because if a Chalice deck faces a matchup where Chalice is bad, the deck is like just very unfavored, I think, right? You know, Chalice is such a huge part of the deck. So Goblins getting to side into Chalices, I think, is pretty powerful, because we can be a Chalice deck, but we don't have to be. So, so Chalice comes in against like almost all the combo decks, and then it's also quite good against like Delver, because they're just so 1-drop heavy that a Chalice can just brick their entire hand, and it also shuts off Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is super important.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So effectively, the only threats in their deck that have any text on them after Chalice is resolved are Trinity Nemesis, Scaremag Angler if they're playing it, if they're Grixis, and like Young Pyromancer, which is the easiest thing in the world to kill. So Chalice is quite good against Delver as well.
So maybe we can start looking at like what's your plan against like the top decks in Legacy? You know, we went over a few of them, and you briefly went over what your plan is for Breach. Is that like is that a matchup where you're going to exercise some patience and hold up interaction, or do you want to like get a fast start on the board and then start holding up interaction? Let me know about it.
Against combo, you're very much like trying to be the beatdown, and so, I mean, it's tough. I'll play GoblinLackey over like hold up like a red elemental blast against Breach, because Reb isn't that good against them until they're casting like Intuition.
Okay.
But I will very much look for hate in my opening hand, and I'll probably cast a hate piece over any true drop in the deck. I would guess. But a very important thing about the sideboard plan as well is that almost all of the cards in the sideboard cost 0 to 1 mana. You don't want expensive sideboard cards ever. I think that's a critical thing in Legacy, is that your sideboard cards are cheap. And I like with the current sideboard plan that I have, I think 6 pieces of stack interaction, which is the Rebs, the Mindbreak Traps, and the Surgical, and then I have 5 pieces of like permanent based hate. And so it forces the opponent to have multiple things. And it's not just like Serenity, you lose. Because that's what was happening to me when I was playing Ley Lines. It was just like I could not beat a Serenity ever. Because it just blow up all my hate pieces and I'd just be dead. So there's kind of this dodging and weaving that's happening sideboarding-wise against most of the combo decks are that way. Like back when Storm was really popular, I really liked Cabal Therapy because they'd be bringing in Echoing Truth, Abrupt Decay, Hercule's Recall, and I would have like 1 Thorn of Amethyst and like a relic or 2 or like 1 Chalice, and so they would not have many targets. But I'd be Cabal Therapying, leaving these bounce and destroy spells in their hand, and just taking all their action, and their deck would become so diluted that they wouldn't be able to put the combo together.
A bad control deck.
Exactly. So you can catch people over sideboarding for a certain aspect and then hit them with the other. So I think that's really an important strategy.
Cabal Therapy.
Yeah, Therapy is so good with Mog War Marshal. That's awesome. Turn 1 Therapy, turn 2 War Marshal, flashback with the main body, so you still have 2 1/1s.
Right.
So good.
Yeah, Cabal Therapy has incredible synergy in this deck.
It does. The only problem with it is it's hard to cast. I set myself as like a minimum 9 black sources to cast Cabal Therapy, and this build only has 8. So I'd have to either make a mountain, a 3rd Badlands, or I'd have to cut one of the mana denial pieces, which I don't really want to do because they're also very good against combo. So that's kind of the tension I'm feeling right now. I am interested in playing Therapy, but it's hard to actually fit in. The mana requirements are too strict.
Actually, I have a question about Cabal Therapy because I've played a decent chunk of like Merfolk splashing like Inquisition of Kozilek or Thoughtseize, and the most awkward thing are hands with Ether Vial and the turn 1 hand disruption. Like I always play, Ether Vial turn 1 anyway, but then on turn 2 it may clog up my hand to play Thoughtseize or Inquisition. Do you have any problem with that, or are there some matchups where you'll Cabal Therapy on turn 1 over an Ether Vial?
Against a deck like Storm, against Brainstorm decks, I would probably turn 1 Therapy I'd probably Therapy Brainstorm, because if you can take the Brainstorm out of their hand, it vastly improves the chances of the the Therapy flashback. It does depend on how proactive your hand is. Like against a combo deck, if I have turn like a turn 1 Lackey or a turn 1 Therapy, I will lead on Lackey because that means I can go, drop something to play with Lackey, cast Therapy, and flash it back in the same turn.
Right.
Sacrificing whatever I put in. So it's tough and contextual. Against like Show and Tell, I probably would play the Vial because they're probably not going to turn 1 you. Like they obviously can, but it's not super likely.
Very statistically unlikely.
Yeah. And it'll depend on like, did my opponent mulligan to the keep 7? Like against like Reanimator, where they're extremely likely to try to go off on turn 1. If I have a turn 1 Therapy, I'm just naming Entomb every time.
So I think this was just a really important point for me to bring out, because like a lot of people look at Ether Vial like this is 100% what you play on turn 1 no matter what, to just brainlessly play this Ether Vial. And there are these niche situations where you want to do something else. And in this case with Cabal Therapy, this is a great exception to the rule.
Yeah. And you got to look at like, what is this Vial actually doing for me? And it'll matter like how, like if your hand is like, say a couple lands, a Vial, a Therapy, and then like a couple of 3-drops, you probably have to play the Vial first, because otherwise you're never going to get to deploy your threats in time. So it's going to be really dependent on, if that vial isn't the first thing coming down, how quickly can you actually put a clock on your opponent?
Yeah. Yeah, context of the hand is going to matter a lot.
Yeah.
So, how about the Miracles matchup? What is your plan against Miracles?
I love playing against Miracles. It
Me
makes
too.
me feel smart. It makes me feel like a smart person. So ultimately, what you're trying to do is present enough pressure on board so that you're forcing them to respond to your threats without overcommitting. But you also need to be keenly aware of their mana development and when it is correct to go all in.
Right.
So there are times where you can't afford to be playing around Determinus, and you need to just be like, okay, it's turn 3. I have a really explosive hand. You need to Terminus me, or you are dead next turn. And so you have to keep track of, like, when was the last time they cast a cantrip? How do they know the top card of their deck? That sort of thing. How much white mana do they have? A really important part of the Miracles matchup nowadays, since they're playing Bant colors for Oko, my biggest kind of realization recently has been the vast majority of the time for Goblins, it is correct to ignore Oko, which sounds very strange. But the problem is it soaks up so much damage and so much time that spending resources trying to kill the Oko is just like waiting to get ruined by the second one. So what you're ultimately wanting to do is you let the Oko sit there. It makes an elk every other turn or every turn if they have Astrolabe. But if they're elking their Astrolabes, their mana is not great. So the port becomes good again. And so you are basically trying to create a situation where you can kill the elk almost every turn with an Expert or Gem Plum Incinerator. Or, maybe you have Trash Master in play and they go to elk their Astrolabe or Food Token and you shatter it in response. Crater Maker can accomplish the same thing. So you're just trying to hit them, ignore Oko, unless it's like a super easy, clean kill. Like, they tick up to 5 and you go War Chief Pile Driver, attack it for 5, and they don't have then I'll do that. But if I have to sink time and resources into it, I'll just kill them. Because once their life total gets in the single digits, it becomes very easy to kill them with Slang Gang Lieutenant. And so you're just trying to get that chip damage in enough so that the Sling Gang can drain them out all of a sudden. So you're trying to balance that pressure, not committing too much, but knowing, when to lunge at them, basically.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of Miracles players do kind of realize that, in a sense, they are the beatdown. Because you can't really out-control Goblins, because it's the card advantage engine is too strong. So they are probably going to want to slam Oko on turn 3. Or Monastery Mentor, or something like that. So the really critical card in the sideboard is Red Elemental Blast, because if you counter the first Oko, it's just a massive blowout, because it's a huge tempo swing, 1 mana for 3, and they only have so many win conditions in their deck.
Right.
So if you can start and you can like Earwig Squad there and Entreat the Angels, that's really good, because Entreat's quite a scary card. Entreat's in the late game is very hard to beat, especially with Mystic Sanctuary. And so you don't want them to reach that super late stage with Sanctuary or with Entreat still in their deck. So you want to squat it out if you get the chance, or find a way to take them off of double white mana in their upkeep. So those are the things you're trying to balance: Planeswalkers, damage race, but preserve your card advantage engine. I think Goblins players might make the mistake of feeling like they can play Miracles today, like it was in like 2016, because it's much more mid-rangey than it used to be. They have actual threats now. They're not just gonna take a million turns to kill you.
Yeah, they have elk tokens.
Right, and like Oko is a pretty serious clock. So if you keep a really slow hand, like you might have used to be able to do, like people, you could keep almost anything with like a matron or a ringleader against old school Miracles. But now you have to be aware of, like, what if my opponent slams a win condition on turn? What can I do about that? Don't get caught with your pants down.
So we brushed about it little lightly earlier. What is your plan against Delver?
So I just did a recording pretty recently for a series I have on my Patreon called Goblin Gauntlet,
Mm-hmm.
where I do kind of deep dives on specific matchups with like other like Moto players who are well known or have really good results. And so I did a video on Blue Red Delver with Lewis CBR, who's usually at the top of the trophy race on Magic Online. He almost always plays Blue Red or Grixis Delver.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did this Blue Red Delver series, and we really found how important, like obviously Aether Vial is like the best card in the matchup by a mile. If you resolve Vial against a Delver deck, you are in fantastic shape. So our best card is Vial, their best card is Dreadhorde. And so the matchup really came down to, can you resolve a Vial, and can you kill Dreadhorde on time? So almost every line you take, you want to think, what if they play Dreadhorde next turn? And so that influences a lot of how you use removal spells, because Goblins has a lot of removal spells, but not all of them kill Dreadhorde. Some of them only kill Delver or only kill Pyromancer. So you want to ration out your removal spells as much as possible. So you might want to like Jump Home Incinerate the Delver, because Munitions Expert is much more likely to kill an expert, or sorry, more likely to kill an Arcanist through a Lightning Bolt or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so keeping track of that rationing of removal is a really important part of the matchup. And then post-board, Pyrokinesis is an insane pickup, because they don't have very much sideboard for Goblins usually. Like they might have like a Blue Mental Blast, a couple like an Abrade or two, those like a Blazing Volley, like a Soft Wrath Sweeper type effect. But you get 2 Pyrokineses, which is amazing, because the biggest thing you lose to with Delver are their fast starts. Like turn 1 Delver, turn 2 Arcanist, turn 3 True Name. Like they're really like zoo-like draws. Like when they're an aggro deck, that's the scary thing. So if you have a Pyrokinesis to just halt them in their tracks, and force them to find more threats and just like be digging for more creatures to attack you with, that's a huge tempo swing, because they have a much better chance of tempoing you out. So if you get the tempo by killing all the creatures for free, it's a huge deal. So I think Pyrokinesis adds a huge dimension to the Delver matchup, because before it's hard to catch up. Because all our removal spells are like board dependent for the most part. So if you never get a board in the first place, you might be staring at like Jump Home Expert, but you still can't kill anything. So getting ahead with the free force of will your 2 things at once kind of deal is really good.
It is the force of will of red.
It is. I was so disappointed when they printed the new force cycle and the red one's just total garbage. I was really hoping they would do
one
like
again.
Yeah, right. I mean, Force of Vigor is really, really good.
For the combo decks.
Yeah, just disturbingly. Force of Vigor is so disgusting. Why does it shatter 2 things? What the hell? Why is Force of Will a 2-for-1? Force of Vigor is a 2-for-2.
In some ways, Force of Vigor is something I wanted to see get printed to beat Artifacts, but in the end, it was just like another really powerful card for like aggressive combo decks that use the graveyard.
Yeah, it's gross.
Leyline of the Void and Grafdigger's Cage all blown up at the same time. But that is ridiculous.
It's really bad. But like they gave us this crappy red force. It's like this should have been. I was really hoping for some sort of Pyrokinesis, variant that had like a damage can't bended clause or something, so it would kill True Nemesis. That was my dream. Mm-hmm. Alas.
So how about the Green Sun Zenith decks?
So these really come down to, well, I guess the Bug Zenith decks I think are good matchups, even though they play like 3 Plague Engineers, like 2 main. The rest of the cards are like pretty bad against you. Protection from blue on Pile Drivers tends to be pretty relevant in the matchup, because they're playing like Leovold and Euro and Oko. So like protection from blue is quite good against those cards. And they like the rest of their creatures are like kind of mana dork size, so Pile Driver can swing into them. Like it's just they're a very slow deck. Like they're pretty weak to turn 1 Lackey. the best they've got is like throw a Gilded Goose in front of it, but then if you have Gem Palm or Munitions Expert, you can clear the way or force a bad trade, and they're pretty susceptible to what Goblin on. The other Green Sun decks like Maverick and Loam are, I guess Loam doesn't even necessarily play Green Sun anymore. It kind of depends on the build. But anyone that's trying to find another Reliquary, those are kind of Another Reliquary is one of the scarier cards for Goblins to face, because it can get out of hand really, really fast. It's hard to use damage-based removal to kill a Knight, because it gets, if they untap once with it, it's pretty easy for them to make it like a 6/6 or 7/7, because they can, if they really have to, they can, sacrifice a land with Knight, get wasteland themselves, and just put a ton of lands in the graveyard. So that's a big part of why I always keep a Relic in my sideboard, because nuking the graveyard to help you pop a Knight with like a Crater Maker can be pretty instrumental. I have a pretty good record against the Loam strategy, like 4-color, 5-color Loam strategies, but it always feels close. You can definitely get run over by like turn 2 Knight off Mox Diamond, or a Mana Dork is like the scariest thing.
Mm-hmm. So why? Now we've heard the effectiveness of Goblins, the pros and cons. Why play something like Goblins over another vile tribal deck like Slivers, which also is a very tricky deck, but also can utilize like Force of Will?
So I think Goblins has greater interactive tools for the most part. Like Slivers probably has a better combo matchup for sure, because it does have Force of Will and it still has a good clock. But compared to Merfolk or Slivers, Goblins has a lot more creature removal. My build has effectively 5 Terminates, which is the 3 Experts, 2 Gem Palms,
right,
and then 3 Crater Makers, which is often Terminate, a Mog Fanatic, a Goblin Chainwhirler, a second one on the sideboard. Trashmaster is often removal, and sometimes Pashlik Mons as well is a pretty good card. It's just not great right now. I'm kind of experimenting. But he's like another pinger type effect. So Goblins is just so heavy on board and creature removal that it's really good against. I think it has a better time against the other creature decks, specifically the Stoneforge decks. Like I feel really good against Death and Taxes, because I just have so many like haymakers against them. I'm good at shattering vials. I'm good at shattering equipment. Mm-hmm. Chainwhirler is Plague Wind. This is true. It's a really, it's pretty strong. So I think the real appeal of Goblins is you should have weaker combo matchups, but you should have superior creature and control matchups for the most part. And you're also better against, you're really good against like a moon stompy type deck.
Yeah. Blood Moon me.
Yeah, Blood Moon me.
Bring it on.
You'll get there. I have five cards I can't cast, or six with your squad that I can't cast through Blood Moon. But you can still vial them in. Mm-hmm. You can still get them in a playoff lackey. Like it's not hard. So, and I know. Like Death and Taxes has a very good Moon Stompy matchup as well, and like they still have a good Eldrazi matchup. Not quite as good as Goblins, I think. Still pretty good. So I think Goblins is not an aggro deck first and foremost, and so you're trying to look to do different things compared to Merfolk or Slivers. Like there's Merfolk and Slivers, from my perspective.
Well, Merfolk's not an aggro deck either.
Merfolk's much more interested in beating down quickly than Goblins is, though.
I don't know. We're a very bad beat. Like my motto with Merfolk is Merfolk race is nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I mean, I guess that's true, but
so I mean that's also the most common misconception I believe people think about Merfolk. Merfolk is like absolutely not an aggro deck to any degree, and maybe that's just how it is. Like none of these vile decks can be aggro decks. Everyone has to sort of
Slivers
take a
is very
role.
aggro. Slivers is like Lords, Crystalline Sliver, and like Flying Haste.
I think, the fact that they have Crystalline Sliver lets them be aggro, because they can take like a more proactive plan and not care about their opponent's removal. Whereas
Yeah, I
Merfolk,
think
like
that's
everything gets shot down, and like all my games are won with Chalice of the Void or a True Name Nemesis that was untouchable.
right. Yeah, sure. No, I can see Merfolk having to lean into kind of, I guess, like prison-y elements in that it has to, because just the removal in Legacy is so good that it's hard to play straight up aggro deck without any protection. That's why Delver is so good, because it's an aggro deck that gets to play, all like 9, 10 free counter spells.
Right.
So leaning into, I guess, like the Goblins is like on the control to aggro kind of spectrum. Slivers is probably the farthest to aggro, and then like probably Humans. I've played a bit of Humans, and Humans is pretty damn aggressive.
Oh yeah.
Champion of Perish gets really big.
Absolutely. Does it modern.
He does so much damage. And then like probably Merfolk's probably about in the middle, I'd say, and then D&T, because D&T has all these taxing elements, and I think Goblin's the furthest to the control side because it has the most amount of top end and the most amount of. So I think if you're looking to beat up on more of the fair decks, like I think Slivers will probably do better against an unfair meta than Goblins. But not to say Goblins is like dead in these combo matchups anymore. Like I think that's a misconception from the old days where we didn't have the tools. But I think stuff like Sling Gang has improved a lot of combo matchups, actually. Sling Gang has done a lot to improve Dark Depths matchup in particular, because you can now go over 20 life and kill them out of combat, which is a huge deal.
That is a big deal. Yeah. You basically,
because if you can survive the first,
twice.
Yeah, so they have to kill. They have to swing with Merit Lake
twice,
and they have to untap another time with it, and you can have a Goblin that is probably draining for 6-7 damage outside of combat. So Sling Gang added a huge dimension to the lands matchup, the depths matchup, Storm. If you just go Lackey into Sling Gang, you got 4 points of burn on the table, so you can put yourself to 24. And if they cast Ad Nauseam, their Ad Nauseam is much riskier, even on like a turn 1 Ad Nauseam on the draw. Isn't necessarily going to get there because you have these 4 points of burn on the table, and if you cast another 2-drop with it, 5 or 6. So Sling Gang did a ton for the deck, and it made show and tell easier too, because they can go show and tell, put in whatever the hell they want, and you can just drain them out if you drop the Sling Gang off the show and tell.
So would you classify this as a control deck?
To some extent, depends on the matchup. It's definitely. It's taking the control role in most of its matchups. Like then
I would call it a control deck.
Yeah, it's strange to think of it that way because it's a deck of 33 creatures or whatever, and a lot of haste creatures and small beatdown stuff. You wouldn't look at Goblin Piledriver and say this is a card for a control deck, but it is like your finisher in your control deck. It's Goblin Piledriver.
It's the Jace the Mind Sculptor.
It's the Jace, yeah.
Or Entreat the Angels. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Goblin Piledriver, Treat the Angel. Similar logic though, because it's like, as I said earlier, you want to sandbag it a lot of the time and use it as when your opponent's resources are depleted because they've been forced to kill all of your 1/1s and 2/2s. Then you kill them with a Piledriver. It's definitely a control deck in a real sense, because against the vast majority of other creature decks, I'm siding out GoblinLackeys against most creature decks because I'm not trying to run them over with creatures. My creatures are smaller than their creatures. They have better card quality than I do, and so I'm trying to beat them with card quantity. And so I'm okay too for winning myself because I have a superior card advantage engine than most decks. So I'm okay, spending 2 removal spells on one Knight of the Reliquary against Maverick, for example. Because I know if I get that Knight off the table, I'll take the game over. As long as if I keep casting my spells and I keep drawing, I'll be okay in the long run. So Goblins is a deck that wants the game to either we either want to kill you on turn 3 or 4 with a Lackey start, or we want the game to go to turn 15.
Right. Yeah, I hear you completely. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception when people look at Goblins. I mean, you even on paper, when you're looking at Goblin Lackey,
Hmm.
And a lot of the other, other cards, it looks like you want to dump your hand onto the board and try to win as quickly as possible. It looks like that's how it's designed on paper, but
It's not how the
talking
game's
through with
played
you,
out.
that's not how it works out at all. And I can see a lot of people just completely taking the wrong role with this archetype and then
Yeah,
just shooting themselves in the foot.
yeah, and I think the biggest thing with that is mulligans. I think people don't mulligan enough with goblins because they keep hands that are too risky. And so I see a lot of players love to keep the old like one land lackey kind of starts, and those are really really risky because you're basically just conceding to a counterspell or a one mana removal spell or even a blocker, and you really don't have to keep those hands. Goblins mulligans extremely well because the card advantage engine is so good. As I was saying earlier with like flooding and stuff, you can keep a hand of like if I'm mulliganing to 5, I'm not putting back lands. I'm putting back spells. I want to keep like 3 lands, Vial, 1 Matron is like a great 5 because you want to just delay the game. Hopefully you have a Rashad Port or something. Because all you have to do is slow the game down, and then Matron for Ringleader will pull you out of your mulligan.
Right. Yeah, talking to you earlier where you kept 3 vials, 4 lands, just shows how much you prioritize mana. And if you look at the list, there's just a million ways of you'll come back from nothing. You don't need the cards are gonna come. You just need the mana to cast them. All right, so that's some very very good advice for anyone that's looking to get into Legacy Goblins. Just out of curiosity, what have you looked into or have worked on at all? Modern Goblins. Like, what's your opinion of modern Goblins?
I played Modern Goblins when Matron came out for Modern Horizons, and everyone was really excited about it because I had basically all of the Legacy deck besides Jump Home Incinerator and Lackey, but it also is missing Wasteland and Port, which is a huge deal. I don't really like Modern as a format very much because it lacks that kind of like intricate interaction that a lot of Legacy games have, in that tiny things matter in Legacy that I think are really cool. Like sequencing your lands is such an important part of Legacy that I think makes the games more interesting because there's very rarely like a decision that doesn't matter at all. And so there's a lot of kind of discrete granular decision making in Legacy that allows you to pick up these tiny edges. And Modern feels, because the axes of interaction are much more limited, like it's much harder to interact with land. There isn't as much spell-based interaction. There's not like all the counter magic. I haven't really been that interested in it. I've played a couple leagues of Modern Goblins. It always felt fine to me. But that version of the deck is much more like clearly a combo control deck where it doesn't have as much removal, but you're still like trying to kill things and progress a card advantage plan. But it is like 4 War Chiefs, 3 to 4 pile drivers, like very much like Goblins from like 10 years ago in Legacy. Where because you don't have the mana denial element, you have to be way more productive, and so you play it very differently. Like in Legacy, generally like don't want to play my War Chief on turn 3. I want to sandbag it. In Modern, I need to jam War Chief on turn 3 and then try to kill my opponent on turn. With like since I'm playing like a bunch of Skirk products, like Skirk, Mogwar Marshal, sack it, play Matron for pile driver, cast 2 pile drivers, swing. It's like stuff like that. It's almost Storm-esque. It's like Storm with creatures.
Yeah.
And so I just haven't... Modern just hasn't kept my attention, to be honest. And I do know that the Valakut decks are pretty popular right now. And when I was playing Modern, the Primeval Titan decks were just like the worst matchups. And I was like, I don't want to play against... I don't want to play against like Primeval Titan decks that have like a bunch of Anger of the Gods in their sideboards, or like Sweltering Suns or whatever. I'm just like,
Primeval Titan can come out on turn 3.
Yeah, that sounds just kind of like hell.
No Russian import there.
Yeah, no, like Cloud Post decks are like one of our best matchups in Legacy, but without having Lackey, Wastelander, Port, like Tron does not seem like fun. Like you got like Ruin is so much worse.
Well, yeah, you need. Well, you have access to Blood Moon.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the thing. It's like Modern forces you to play these super boring and lame like Blood Moon.
Yeah.
like I played Blood Moon Legacy for a while. But I'm not doing it anymore because like there's a bunch of reasons. Like the rules change made Blood Moon a lot worse. Force of Vigor made Blood Moon a lot worse. And Astrolabe made Blood Moon a lot worse.
Astrolabe also made Blood Moon a lot worse in Modern as well.
Yeah, so like I like the games where Blood Moon happens are either just like it did nothing, and I play Magic because I really enjoy like interactive games, and so I just have very little interest in games that are or in decks that have to rely on kind of like slam this, hope this is good enough, and so I'm really kind of turned off by having like being forced to run Blood Moon and those types of cards in my deck.
Right. All right. So, in your opinion, what kind of person is Legacy Goblins for? Like, who would want to pick up this sort of deck?
I think you have to really enjoy the process of finding your role. I think something like Goblins does more than any other deck is changing roles within a matchup. Like within a single game, you might become the beatdown and become the control back and forth many times. Because your hands can be so explosive or so slow. There's a huge range. A Goblins player has to be able to embrace variance. Because there's such a wide gamut of things that can happen. And there's kind of like a built-in like kind of RNG feeling with like Ringleader, where sometimes it hits 4, sometimes it hits 0. You have to be able to handle that.
It's a collected company.
Yeah.
Red collected company.
yeah, kind of. So you have to be able to embrace variance, and you have to be interested in minutia. It's a very detail-oriented deck. Like it's kind of like Death and Taxes in that your cards are relatively low power level for Legacy, and so you really need to eke out as much of an advantage as possible out of every single one of them. So it does take a certain kind of person interested in getting those small advantages, like tight play, and getting satisfaction out of that, like knowing, oh, I made this very insightful choice to wait or something like that to find Goblins appealing, because it can be frustrating for sure. Goblins can have some serious swings in it where it's just like, oh, I mulligan 5 like multiple matches in a row because the deck has like a high curve, and maybe you had like a 1-lander 7 and then you had a 6-lander 6, and it was a matchup where you can't keep either of those hands, and it's just like it can be really frustrating, or you're just running into a bunch of combo decks in a row, and you have to be able to tolerate that. But you do recognize that like you do have some very lopsided matchups, but it makes winning them that much more satisfying, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
Like if you take a match off of Belcher, it's like the best thing ever. Like they go for like an Empty the Warren or something, and you have like your turn 3 Chain Whirler that lines up just on time or something, or you Mind Break trap them or whatever, and it's like stealing them at the tough matchups is really fun. Or you just beat an insane amount of hate. Like I had I'm just like happy whenever I beat 2 Plague Engineers that were on board at the time. It's extremely hard to do. Like it's almost a complete lockout. But it happened in a game where I was like, I had the only X3 in my deck was a Chain Whirler, and I cast Chain Whirler and then ETB on the stack, cast Munitions Expert, deal 1 damage to 1 Plague Engineer. So I got to take out one of them with the ETB of both the Expert, so that dealt 1 damage, and the Chain Whirler ETB dealt another damage.
Yeah. And
then I had like another removal spell to kill the second Engineer, and like crawling back from those like super dire board states. So you can't scoop early with Goblins. That's something I see. People be like, oh, dead, can't win from here. I'm like, just
play it to the end.
play it to the end. You might top deck something like you don't
never know.
You can win from some pretty absurd circumstances. So be willing to play it out. Find fun in the little intricacies, and be willing to handle the swings. Because sometimes it can be like the greatest. It can feel like the best deck ever, where you just like top deck Matron, Violin, Ringleader, draw 4 cards. You know, win out of nowhere, or you can feel super dumb when you cast a Ringleader that hits like either nothing or like a GoblinLackey on turn 6, and you're just like, you know, why?
It's useless.
Yeah. It's a 4-mana Baleful Strix.
Yeah.
So you gotta be able to handle that.
All right. So if people want to go deeper with you and learn more about Legacy Goblins, play it like a master, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
So I'm GoblinLacky1 on most social media stuff. I'm GoblinLacky1 on Twitch. I stream a couple times a week. They usually always play 1 to 2 leagues. And then I'm hoping to start playing the prelims more often. The one that is available in my time zone, Thursday at 6 EST. And I'm GoblinLacky1 on Twitter. I'm one GoblinLackey on Reddit, because GoblinLacky1 was taken when I moved my Reddit account. Yeah, rough. But I'm somewhat active on, like, I'm always looking at like the Legacy subreddit. So people ask Goblins questions, I'll pop in there and say something. I have a Patreon that I have special content for. I have a sideboard guide that I keep updated bi-weekly.
You people love those sideboard guides.
People love the sideboard guides.
People love sideboard guides, I know.
Sideboarding is tough with Goblins. There's a lot of stuff that like needs to be hashed out, and some unintuitive things, like when are the matchups where you board out Vial and stuff like that. And
Legacy is changing constantly too.
Yeah, so I've had to update it a lot because I keep changing. So I have the Patreon where I do that. I also have a monthly article series that I do. It's kind of like, imagine like This Week in Legacy, but like this month in Goblins.
Yeah.
And then these Goblin series that I've started. That 3rd episode is being recorded next week. And that's a monthly video series where I do a deep dive with a specific like expert pilot. And we work out like the intricacies of matchups. So far I've done Hogak and Blue Red Delver, and then Dark Depths is coming up for next month. So that's like everything where you can find me. And I'm always happy to talk about Goblin. I love the deck. I think it's just has an extremely dynamic experience that is really unique. And I love that it's like this really old archetype in Legacy that is still relevant after all these years. Because to me, that's what Legacy's about. It's the game. And so winning with creatures that were printed in like 2003 or 2000, it's just like really, really satisfying to me. Even after all the power creep of the past 2 decades, Goblin Matron and Goblin Ringleader still gets there.
Yeah, beat it, Hogak.
Yeah.
Goblin Matron's going to show you what's what.
Yeah, hey.
Well, thank you very much, Eli, for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it. It was a great insight. You know, when we bring people like you on, we learn new things about archetypes, especially one that's not super popular. Maybe now that you can show the world how this deck is really played and done, we can see a lot more Goblin results at a competitive level, at the Grand Prix level, maybe anyway, any competitive level for Legacy, because it needs a master, it needs a leader, and maybe
Legacy's
people
kind of a casual now.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know, there was that Legacy event that just sold out not too long ago. The
40K that sold out in 30 minutes.
That might be a sign of things to come. There might be more independent people with like higher entry fees, like $500. Who knows what they'll do? And then
if there's like a high roller thing.
I'm sure if it's only like one, if a Legacy player only plays like once or it's like maybe twice a year, they're willing to pay like a very steep entry fee to play a Legacy event.
Yeah, and so this entry was like $200, and it sold out in 30 minutes, and the wait list, a 500-person wait list, filled up in 3 hours. So 750 people in 3.5 hours for an event that's in September.
Yes, in September. September. Yeah, so that's a sign that, Legacy is not dead. It's still around. It's still going to live for a very long time. I think the card pool was printed a lot heavier than the vintage card pool, so it's not exactly going to go in the way of vintage so quickly. There's going to be a lot of big Legacy events still to come. So we got to see Goblins in that top 8 in September.
Yes.
With a lot of time to prepare.
I have a friend who's going, so we're working on Goblins together. And he's played for a long time. And so there are some other Goblin experts. I think, like, if people are looking for more Goblins content outside of mine, the person who does play Goblins and like post stuff is Marcelo Scatena, who is known for, he won a Legacy PTQ this winter with Goblins, which was awesome. At a GP Bologna, he won the PTQ, and that was like probably Goblins' best paper result in a long time. It was like 350 players.
Yep.
And
it's a serious tournament.
Yeah, it was he beat Rodrigo Segures in the finals. He posts stuff on YouTube, so ScatmanX or Marcelo Scatena on various social stuff. I also have a YouTube channel. I forgot to mention that I post all my Twitch VODs on there. So if you ever miss a stream, I always upload the whole thing onto YouTube. So definitely check out him as well, because he and I have like pretty similar thoughts, but he plays more formats. He plays more modern stuff. So if you're looking for modern Goblins content, check out his channel.
Get involved in the Goblins community.
Oh yeah, we have a fantastic Discord server. I'm so proud of our Discord server. The Legacy Goblins Discord server is one of the best of all of like the Legacy decks servers. I really like what we've done with it. It's a really good community. Lots of people sharing ideas, and I think we've avoided a lot of like the echo chamber effect that a lot of Discords can get, where like ideas get shouted down. We have a lot of people brewing with like wild stuff. And we
gotta find out what works.
Yeah, I mean, we've had someone testing Living Death Goblins and like Food Chain and all these different wacky ideas. But we also try to keep things as like we also try like the traditional builds, or there's a huge range of what people try, and I'm always on there to try to help people out.
Awesome. Well, anyway, thank you very much for coming on to the show. This has been Nikachu, Merfolk Master, interviewing GoblinLackey1, Goblin Master, talking about the insights to Goblins and Legacy.